The words hit me like a slap across the face. Stop being selfish. You're so old you won't have time to enjoy the money from the sale anyway. My son David stood in my kitchen, his designer suit perfectly pressed, demanding I sell my beloved country house so his new wife could have a sports car. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. Let me back up and tell you how I got here. I'm Margaret Sullivan, 72 years old, and apparently too ancient to deserve nice things according to my only child. The country house in question isn't just any property. It's the lake house my late husband Robert built with his own hands 40 years ago. David grew up there, learned to fish on that dock, brought his first girlfriend there to impress her. That first girlfriend, by the way, wasn't the 29-year-old Brittany currently hanging on his arm like expensive jewelry. "Mom, you never even use the place anymore," David continued, his voice taking on that patronizing tone he'd perfected since marrying his second wife 8 months ago. "It's just sitting there collecting dust while Brittany and I could really use the cash." I looked at Brittany, perched on my kitchen stool like a blonde vulture. She had that particular expression women get when they're mentally spending money that isn't theirs yet. Her Instagram-perfect nails tapped impatiently against her phone case. "The house is worth at least $400,000, she chimed in helpfully. "That's enough for the Porsche and maybe a little vacation to celebrate." I almost choked on my coffee. A little vacation to celebrate selling the home where my husband and I had planned to grow old together, where I still kept his fishing rods and the wind chimes he'd hung on the porch. "I'm not selling," I said quietly. David's expression hardened. "Don't be ridiculous. What do you need that big house for? You live here now." He gestured around my modest 2-bedroom apartment like he was pointing out a prison cell. "Because it's mine," I replied. "Technically," Brittany said, examining her manicure, "you won't need anything much longer anyway. I mean, at your age." The sentence hung in the air like poison gas. At my age? What? At my age, I should just die quietly and stop inconveniencing the young people with my continued existence? David shot his wife a warning look. But he didn't disagree with her. That silence spoke volumes. I said no. I stood up, my knees protesting slightly. "The house stays in the family." "We are family," David snapped, "and we need that money now, not after you're gone." There it was, the truth finally crawling out from under its rock. They weren't asking for my help. They were demanding their inheritance early, with interest. After they left, I sat in my empty apartment, listening to the silence. David's parting words echoed in my mind. "Think about it, Mom. Do the right thing for once." The right thing. As if keeping the home where I'd buried my husband's ashes in the garden was somehow wrong. That's when I decided to do something that would change everything. I picked up my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found a number I hadn't called in 2 years. Sarah Mitchell answered on the 3rd ring. "Mrs. Sullivan?" Sarah's voice carried that careful politeness reserved for ex-mothers-in-law. "Is everything all right?" I'd always liked Sarah. She was smart, successful, and treated me with genuine respect during her 10-year marriage to David. She was also the reason I knew exactly what kind of man my son had become. "I'm fine, dear. I was wondering if you might have time for coffee this week. I have a proposition that might interest you." There was a pause. Sarah was a family law attorney. She knew when something significant was brewing. "Of course. How about tomorrow morning? That little cafe on Maple Street?" Perfect. I needed someone I could trust, and Sarah had proven her character when she'd walked away from David's cheating with her dignity intact. Unlike Brittany, who'd been the other woman before becoming the current wife. The next morning, I arrived at the cafe early, choosing a corner table where we could talk privately. Sarah walked in looking professional and polished, her dark hair pulled back, her suit impeccable. She'd always dressed like someone who took herself seriously. "You look well," she said, settling across from me with her latte. "I heard about David's situation." By situation, she meant his 3rd attempt at starting a business with other people's money. This time it was some cryptocurrency venture that had folded faster than a house of cards in a windstorm. "That's actually what I wanted to discuss." I leaned forward, lowering my voice. "How would you feel about owning a lake house?" Sarah's eyebrows rose slightly. "I'm listening." I told her everything. David's demands, Brittany's calculations, the casual cruelty of suggesting I didn't have long enough left to enjoy my own property. Sarah's expression grew darker with each detail. "He wants you to sell the house where you scattered Robert's ashes," she said when I finished. It wasn't a question. So his new wife can have a sports car. Sarah stared into her coffee for a long moment. When she looked up, there was something cold and determined in her eyes that reminded me why she'd never lost a case. What exactly are you proposing, Mrs. Sullivan? I'm proposing to sell you the house, quietly, privately, for exactly what it's worth. And David doesn't know you're considering this? I smiled for the first time in days. David doesn't know a lot of things, like how I've been documenting every conversation we've had about money since he married that girl. Or how I've been quietly transferring assets to protect them from his creditors. Sarah leaned back in her chair, and I could practically see the legal wheels turning in her head. This isn't about the money for you, is it? Not at all. This is about teaching my son that some things aren't for sale, and that treating your mother like a walking ATM has consequences. When would you want to do this? Soon, before he gets more aggressive about it. I pulled out a folder I'd prepared. I've had the house appraised recently. Fair market value is $420,000. Sarah opened the folder, scanning the documents with professional efficiency. These look legitimate. You've really thought this through. I've had plenty of time to think. 20 years of being a widow gives you perspective on what matters. She closed the folder and met my eyes. Mrs. Sullivan, I have to ask, are you doing this to hurt David or to protect yourself? It was a fair question. Sarah had seen firsthand how David operated, how he could be charming and manipulative in equal measure. She also knew that I'd spent years enabling his behavior, bailing him out of one financial crisis after another. Both, I answered honestly. But mostly, I'm doing it because that house deserves to be owned by someone who will love it. Sarah was quiet for several minutes, processing everything I'd told her. Finally, she nodded. I'll buy it, but I have one condition. What's that? You get to keep using it whenever you want. It's still your home. Mrs. Sullivan, I'm just protecting it for you. That's when I knew I'd chosen the right person. Planning the sale felt like preparing for a military operation. Sarah and I met 3 more times over the next week, working out every detail with the precision of seasoned generals. We'll need to keep this completely confidential, Sarah explained during our second meeting. I'll use my maiden name on all the paperwork, Sarah Chen. David knows I kept my professional name, but he doesn't know I legally changed back to my birth name after the divorce. Smart. David was lazy about details when it suited him, but he wasn't stupid. If he saw Sarah Mitchell on any documents, even he would connect the dots. How long will the whole process take? I asked. With cash purchase, no inspections needed, and both parties motivated? 2 weeks, maybe less. Sarah smiled grimly. I've been looking for a property exactly like this. Amazing how the perfect house just fell into my lap. We scheduled the inspection for the following Monday. I would drive out to the lake house, as I normally did, for my weekly cleaning and maintenance visit. Sarah would meet me there as my potential buyer, and we'd go through the motions of a legitimate showing. What if David shows up unexpectedly? Sarah asked. He won't. He hasn't been to the lake house in over a year. Says it's too far from the city. I couldn't keep the bitterness out of my voice. Too far from his precious Wi-Fi and delivery services. That weekend, I found myself standing in David's old bedroom at the lake house, looking at the faded marks on the wall where he'd measured his height each summer. He'd loved this place once. We'd had our best conversations on the dock at sunset, talking about his dreams and plans for the future. When had he become this stranger who saw everything in terms of its cash value? My phone buzzed with a text from Brittany. Hey Mama M, any thoughts on the house situation? David said you needed time to think, but we're super excited to start looking at cars. Mama M. As if we were girlfriends instead of... What were we exactly? She was married to my son, but she'd never bothered to build an actual relationship with me. I was just an obstacle to be charmed around when necessary. I typed back, still thinking. These things take time. Her response came immediately. Totally get it. Just remember the market is super hot right now. Strike while the iron is high. Strike while the iron is high. She couldn't even get the expression right. Monday morning arrived gray and drizzly. Perfect weather for what felt like a funeral. I drove out to the lake house with my usual bag of cleaning supplies, playing the part of the dutiful homeowner maintaining a property she was about to sell. Sarah arrived exactly on time, looking every inch the successful attorney who could afford a $400,000 lake house. She'd even brought a clipboard and measuring tape for authenticity. "It's beautiful," she said, as I showed her through the rooms Robert had lovingly crafted. "These built-in bookshelves are incredible. My husband made those himself. He was a carpenter before he started his construction business." We walked through each room, Sarah asking intelligent questions about the electrical system, the septic tank, the dock maintenance. Anyone watching would have seen exactly what we wanted them to see: a widow reluctantly considering selling her beloved home to a qualified buyer. "The garden is spectacular," Sarah said as we walked around the property. "Those roses must be decades old. Robert planted them for our 10th anniversary." I touched one of the pink blooms gently. "That's where I scattered his ashes 3 years ago." Sarah's expression softened. "Mrs. Sullivan, are you sure about this? Once we do this, there's no going back." I thought about David's words again. "Stop being selfish. You're so old you won't have time to enjoy the money anyway." "I'm sure. This house needs someone who will appreciate it." "Then let's make it official. I'll have the papers drawn up by Wednesday." As Sarah drove away, I sat on the dock watching the water lap against the posts Robert had driven into the lake bed 40 years ago. In less than a week, this would all belong to someone else. But unlike David's plan, this someone else would preserve what Robert and I had built together. My phone rang. David's name flashed on the screen. "Hi, sweetheart," I answered, proud of how normal my voice sounded. "Mom, have you thought any more about the house? Brittany found this amazing Porsche online, but the seller wants to move fast. I'm still considering my options." "What options?" "It's a simple yes or no question." That's where he was wrong. It wasn't simple at all. But by the time he figured that out, it would be far too late. The closing took place on a Wednesday morning in Sarah's law office. I told David I was going to my book club, a lie that came surprisingly easily. After 47 years of marriage and 20 years of widowhood, I'd become quite good at protecting my privacy. "Are you nervous?" Sarah asked as we sat in her conference room, waiting for the notary to arrive. "Terrified," I admitted, "but also more excited than I've been in years." The paperwork was straightforward when both parties actually wanted the same thing. Sarah had secured a cashier's check for the full amount, plus enough extra to cover all the closing costs. Everything would be handled cleanly, legally, and completely privately. "The deed will be recorded with the county tomorrow," the notary explained as I signed my name for what felt like the 100th time. "The property will officially belong to Sarah Chen as of noon today." Sarah Chen. Even seeing the name on legal documents felt like a small victory. David had no idea his ex-wife had legally reclaimed her birth name after their divorce. He probably assumed she was still pining away somewhere, using his surname and mourning their lost love. If only he knew she was sitting across from me, writing a check for the property he'd demanded I sell to fund his wife's shopping spree. "Mrs. Sullivan," the notary said, "you'll need to remove any personal property you want to keep before the end of the month." "Actually," Sarah interjected smoothly, "Mrs. Sullivan and I have a separate agreement regarding her personal effects. She's welcome to retrieve items at her convenience." Another small kindness that David would never have thought to offer. After the closing, Sarah and I sat in her office sharing coffee and something that felt remarkably like friendship. "So what happens now?" she asked. "Now I go home and wait for David to discover what I've done." "How long do you think that will take?" I considered this. David was self-absorbed, but not entirely stupid. Eventually, he'd get impatient enough to drive out to the lake house and confront me directly. Or he'd send Brittany to do his dirty work while he stayed safely in the city. A week, maybe 2? He'll try calling first, then escalate to surprise visits when I don't give him the answer he wants. "And what will you tell him?" "The truth, that I sold the house." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "Just like that?" "Just like that. I won't tell him who bought it immediately. Let him wonder for a while. He could use some uncertainty in his life." We shook hands formally. Then Sarah did something unexpected. She hugged me. "Thank you," she whispered, "for trusting me with this. Thank you for wanting it for the right reasons." Driving home, I felt lighter than I had in months. The check in my purse represented more than just money. It represented the power to make my own decisions about my own life. David had spent so long treating me like a resource to be managed that I'd almost forgotten I was actually a person with rights and options. That evening, I sat in my apartment looking through photo albums from the lake house. Pictures of David as a boy, proudly holding up fish he'd caught off the dock. Robert teaching him to use power tools in the garage they'd converted into a workshop. Family barbecues with David's friends from high school. All of them treating the lake house like their personal summer camp. When had David's relationship with the house changed from love to calculation? When had he stopped seeing it as home and started seeing it as collateral? My phone buzzed with another text from Brittany. Mama M, just wanted to let you know we found the perfect car. It's a 2023 Porsche Macan in this gorgeous coral color that totally matches my new handbag. Can't wait to celebrate your decision. Yummed. Coral color. She wanted to liquidate my husband's legacy so she could buy a car that matched her accessories. I typed back, decision made, we should talk soon. Her response was immediate. OMG, yes! David is going to be so happy. Should we come over tonight? Let me call David tomorrow. This deserves a proper conversation. 3 heart-eye emojis and a champagne glass appeared on my screen. I turned off my phone and poured myself a glass of the good wine I'd been saving. Tomorrow, I would call my son and tell him the house was sold. I would watch his excitement turn to confusion when he realized he wouldn't be getting any money. And eventually, when he was desperate enough to demand answers, I would tell him exactly who was now living in the house where he'd learned to ride a bike. But tonight, I was going to enjoy the last few hours of being the only person who knew how perfectly this was all going to work out. I waited until Thursday afternoon to call David. I wanted him to have a full day of anticipation, maybe even starting to shop for sports cars online with his wife. Let them taste the excitement before I served them reality. Mom! His voice was practically vibrating with enthusiasm. Brittany said you made a decision about the house? I did. I sold it. The silence stretched so long, I thought the call had dropped. You sold it? To who? A private buyer, someone who appreciated what the property represents. Wait. I could hear him pacing now, his footsteps echoing on what sounded like hardwood floors. You sold it without talking to me? Without even telling me you were considering offers? The indignation in his voice was almost comical. This was the same man who demanded I sell the house to fund his wife's shopping spree. But apparently he'd expected to control every aspect of the transaction. You told me to sell it, David. I sold it. But we were supposed to discuss the details, the price, the timeline, what you'd do with the money. Ah, there it was. What I'd do with the money. He'd been so confident that some of that cash would find its way into his pocket, just like it always had when I liquidated assets to help with his various financial emergencies. The price was fair market value. The timeline was immediate. The money is in my account. Our account. Brittany's voice came through the speaker in the background. It should be in our account. I heard David shush her. But the damage was done. Their true expectations were now out in the open. David, I think there's been a misunderstanding. This was my house to sell, and the proceeds are mine to keep. But you never use that money. You live like a miser. What's the point of having $400,000 sitting in savings when your family needs help? My family needed help with a car payment? It's not just about the car. His voice was rising now, losing that careful control he usually maintained. It's about building a life together. Brittany and I are trying to establish ourselves, and you're sitting on money that won't do you any good. It's doing me plenty of good. I have financial security. For what? You're 72. How much security do you need? There it was again. That casual dismissal of my right to exist comfortably for whatever time I had left. In David's world, I was supposed to quietly redistribute my assets to the younger generation and then conveniently disappear. I need enough security to make sure I never have to depend on someone who talks to me the way you're talking to me right now. The line went quiet again. When David spoke again, his voice was lower, more controlled, but with an edge that made my skin crawl. Who bought it, Mom? A private buyer. That's not an answer. Who specifically bought my father's house? A woman who will appreciate it. Give me a name. The command in his voice triggered something primal in me. This wasn't my son asking for information. This was a man used to getting his way through intimidation, trying to bully his elderly mother into compliance. No. You heard me. No. The sale is final, the deed is recorded, and the new owner's identity is none of your business. Like hell, it's not my business. That house has been in our family for 40 years. And now it's not. You wanted it sold, David. Congratulations. You got exactly what you asked for. I could hear him breathing heavily through the phone, probably trying to calculate his next move. David had always been strategic, even as a child. He was trying to figure out how to regain control of a situation that had spiraled completely away from him. I'm coming over, he finally said. I won't be here. Then I'll wait. I'm going out of town for a few days, to visit your father's grave at the lake house. It was a lie, but a beautifully crafted one. If David drove out to the lake house looking for me, he'd discover that someone else was now living there. Someone who had every legal right to call the police if he didn't leave when asked. The new owners don't mind you visiting? The new owner is very understanding about the emotional attachment to the property. After I hung up, I realized my hands were shaking slightly. Not from fear, but from adrenaline. I'd just completely outmaneuvered my son, and it felt better than I'd expected. My phone buzzed with a text. This isn't over. I typed back, yes it is. Then I called Sarah. How did it go? She asked. Better than I hoped. He's angry, confused, and starting to panic. It's exactly what he deserves. Think he'll try to find out who bought it? Oh, he'll definitely try. But good luck to him. Sarah Chen doesn't exist in his world. What if he drives out to the house? I smiled. Then he's in for quite a surprise. 3 days later, my phone exploded with calls. David, Brittany, David again. Text after text, each more frantic than the last. The last message was a video call from Brittany. Against my better judgment, I answered. Margaret. She was in her car, makeup smeared, looking nothing like the composed gold digger who'd insulted me in my own kitchen. You have to tell us who bought the house. Why? Because David drove out there yesterday and there was someone living there, like actually living there, with furniture and everything. This was even better than I'd hoped. I told you I sold it to a private buyer. But they wouldn't tell David who they were. They said they were house-sitting for the new owner and that he was trespassing. I could barely contain my delight. Sarah must have moved quickly, maybe even hired someone to stay at the house while she arranged her own move. Smart woman. If the new owners told David he was trespassing, then he should probably stay away. But it's his father's house. Brittany was practically shrieking now. He has rights. Actually, he doesn't. Not anymore. This is so unfair. You can't just sell someone's childhood home without telling them. I can sell my own property to whoever I choose, whenever I choose, for whatever reasons I choose. That's what ownership means. Brittany's face crumpled. But what about our car? And there it was. The real tragedy in her mind wasn't that David had lost access to his father's house. It was that she'd lost access to what she'd considered her money. You'll have to find another way to pay for your Porsche. We can't afford it without the house money. David's business isn't doing well, and my boutique isn't making enough yet, and we were counting on that money. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. But then I remembered her sitting in my kitchen, calculating the value of my grief, like she was appraising jewelry. Perhaps you should have thought of that before demanding I sell my home. After I hung up, I sat in my quiet apartment feeling something I hadn't experienced in years. Complete satisfaction. Not happiness exactly, but the deep contentment that comes from perfect justice. My phone rang again. This time it was Sarah. Mrs. Sullivan, I think you should know, David showed up at the house yesterday. Brittany mentioned that. I hope you weren't there. I wasn't, but my friend Marcus was. I asked him to house-sit while I arranged the move, and he handled David beautifully. Told him he was house-sitting for the new owner and that he needed to leave the property immediately. How did David react? According to Marcus, he got very aggressive. Started demanding to know who the new owner was, claiming he had legal rights to the property. Marcus threatened to call the police. Did he leave? Eventually. But he sat in his car at the end of the driveway for over an hour, just staring at the house. I felt a chill. David angry was one thing. David obsessive was something else entirely. Sarah, I think you should know that David can be persistent when he doesn't get his way. I can handle persistent. I dealt with him for 10 years, remember? Besides, legally, I'm completely protected. The deed is in my name, all the paperwork is filed with the county, and I have every right to deny him access to my property. Even so, be careful. He's more desperate than I've ever seen him. Mrs. Sullivan, can I ask you something? Of course. Are you having any second thoughts? Any regrets about how this played out? I thought about that for a long moment. Was I having regrets? Had I been too harsh, too calculating in my revenge against my own son? Then I remembered David's words. Stop being selfish. You're so old you won't have time to enjoy the money anyway. No regrets, I said firmly. The house is in better hands now. Good, because I'm moving in this weekend, and I plan to invite you for dinner soon as our first official guest. After we hung up, I realized something had shifted. For the first time since Robert died, I wasn't dreading the future. I wasn't waiting for the next financial emergency, the next demand, the next casual cruelty disguised as family obligation. I was free, and David was about to discover just how expensive his greed had been. My phone buzzed with one final text from him. I'm going to find out who bought that house, and when I do, I'm going to make them very sorry they got involved in our family business. I smiled as I typed back, good luck with that. But I made a mental note to warn Sarah. David had no idea who he was threatening, but Sarah Chen knew exactly who she was dealing with, and David Sullivan was about to get an education in consequences that was 20 years overdue. It took David exactly 4 days to figure out who Sarah Chen really was. I was having coffee Tuesday morning when my phone rang with a call that would have woken the dead. Sarah? You sold my father's house to my ex-wife? I held the phone away from my ear, waiting for the screaming to subside. When David got this angry, he usually ran out of steam after the initial explosion. Years of managing his tantrums had taught me patience. Good morning to you too, David. Don't you dare good morning me. How could you do this? How could you sell to that vindictive witch? Vindictive witch. That was rich, coming from a man who demanded I sell my home to buy his current wife a sports car. Sarah made a fair offer for fair market value. The transaction was completely legitimate. She only bought it to spite me. This is some sick revenge plot you two cooked up together. Actually, it had been entirely my idea, but I wasn't about to diminish Sarah's role in David's imagination. Let him think his ex-wife was as calculating as he was. Sarah Chen is a successful attorney who wanted a lake house. I had a lake house to sell. It's simple business. Her name isn't Chen. Her name is Mitchell. She's still my wife. I almost laughed out loud. David, you divorced Sarah 3 years ago. She legally changed her name back to Chen 18 months ago. She's not your wife, and she hasn't been for quite some time. The silence that followed was profound. I could practically hear the wheels turning in his head as he processed this information. David had always assumed Sarah was still pining away somewhere, too heartbroken to move on with her life. The reality that she'd not only moved on, but had legally erased his surname from her identity was clearly devastating to his ego. She can't live there, he said finally, his voice lower, but more dangerous. I won't allow it. You don't have a choice in the matter. It's her property now. We'll see about that. I'm calling my lawyer. Good luck. Sarah is a lawyer, and she specializes in family law. She knows exactly what rights you do and don't have regarding property that belongs to someone else. After he hung up, I called Sarah immediately. He knows, I said without preamble. I figured he would eventually. Marcus said he saw David parked at the end of the driveway again yesterday, just sitting there watching the house. Sarah, he threatened to call his lawyer. He also said he won't allow you to live there. Let him call whoever he wants. I have the deed, the title insurance, and 3 years of experience dealing with David's empty threats. Besides, his lawyer will tell him exactly what I'm telling you. He has no legal standing whatsoever. What about the emotional harassment? The stalking? If he keeps showing up uninvited, I'll file for a restraining order. David always backs down when actual legal consequences are on the table. I hoped she was right, but something in David's voice had worried me. This wasn't just anger anymore. It was humiliation. And humiliated men often did stupid things. That afternoon, Brittany called. Margaret, you have to fix this. Her voice was tight with barely controlled panic. David is talking about hiring a private investigator to find dirt on Sarah. He wants to prove the sale was somehow illegal. The sale was completely legal. But he's spending money we don't have. He's already paid some lawyer $2,000 just for a consultation. We can't afford this. Ah, there was the real problem. David's obsession with the house was now costing them money they'd planned to spend on luxury items. Perhaps you should talk to your husband about accepting reality. He won't listen. He just keeps saying his father's house belongs in the family and that Sarah stole it from him. Sarah didn't steal anything. She bought it. But you knew she was his ex-wife. You did this on purpose. I smiled. I did exactly what David asked me to do. I sold the house. To the one person guaranteed to make him miserable. I sold it to the person who would appreciate it most. If that makes David miserable, perhaps he should examine his own behavior. Brittany hung up without saying goodbye. That evening, I drove out to the lake house for the first time since the sale. I wanted to see how Sarah was settling in, and honestly, I was curious to see David's reaction if he spotted my car in the driveway. Sarah answered the door wearing jeans and a paint-splattered t-shirt, looking younger and happier than I'd seen her in years. "Mrs. Sullivan, perfect timing. I'm just finishing up the living room." She'd painted the walls a warm cream color that made the room feel larger and brighter. Robert's built-in bookshelves now held Sarah's law books mixed with novels and family photos. It looked like a home where someone actually lived, not a museum to the past. "It's beautiful," I said, meaning it. "It feels alive again. Come see the kitchen." I finally got the coffee maker working properly. As we sat at the kitchen table, sharing coffee and watching the sunset over the lake, I felt something I hadn't expected. Peace. The house was happy again. "Any word from David today?" Sarah asked. "He called this morning. He's not taking the news well. I saw him drive by twice yesterday, slow enough that I could see him staring at the house, but not quite slow enough to constitute harassment. Are you worried?" Sarah considered this. "About David? Not really. He's always been more bark than bite. But I am concerned about what this obsession is costing him financially and emotionally." That was Sarah. Even after everything David had put her through, she still worried about his well-being. It made me understand why I'd liked her so much during the marriage. "David is a grown man who makes his own choices," I said. "You're not responsible for his reactions." "I know, but I also know him well enough to recognize when he's spiraling." As if summoned by our conversation, a car pulled into the driveway. David's black BMW, moving too fast and stopping too close to the house. Sarah and I looked at each other. "Here we go," she said calmly. David stormed up to the front door like he still lived there, his face red with rage and his expensive suit wrinkled from what looked like a day of frantic activity. Sarah opened the door before he could knock. "Hello, David." "Don't you hello David me. I want to know exactly how you manipulated my mother into this scheme." He pushed past Sarah into the living room, his eyes scanning the changes she'd made with obvious distress. When he spotted me sitting calmly at the kitchen table, his expression shifted to pure fury. "I should have known. You two planned this whole thing together." I stayed seated, keeping my voice level. "Actually, it was entirely my idea." "Bullshit! Sarah's been plotting this since our divorce. She couldn't stand that I moved on and found happiness." Sarah closed the front door and leaned against it, crossing her arms. "David, you've been served with trespassing papers. I'm going to need you to leave." "Trespassing? This is my father's house. This is my house. I own it legally and completely. You have no rights here." David's laugh was bitter and ugly. "Rights? You want to talk about rights? I have a right to know how you convinced my mother to betray her own family." "I didn't betray anyone," I said, finally standing up. "I made a business decision about my own property. Your property that was supposed to be my inheritance." There it was. The truth David had been dancing around for weeks. He'd never seen the lake house as my home. He'd seen it as his future asset, something he was entitled to, simply because he existed. "David," Sarah said quietly, "your mother doesn't owe you an inheritance. She doesn't owe you anything. Stay out of this, Sarah. This is family business. It became my business when your mother chose to sell me her house." David turned on me, his face twisted with betrayal. "How could you do this to me? After everything I've done for you?" I almost choked. "Everything you've done for me? David, what exactly have you done for me? I call you. I visit. I include you in family events. You call when you need money. You visit when you want something. And you include me in family events where your wife insults me and you don't defend me. That's not true, isn't it? When was the last time you called just to see how I was doing? When was the last time you took me to dinner without asking for a loan? When was the last time you treated me like your mother instead of your personal bank?" David opened his mouth, then closed it. We both knew he couldn't answer those questions. The house was supposed to stay in the family, he said finally. It did stay in the family. It stayed with someone who actually appreciates what your father built here. She's not family. She's my ex-wife. She's more family to me than you've been lately. The words hit David like a physical blow. He actually staggered backward, his face going pale. You don't mean that. I mean every word. Sarah treats me with respect. She listens when I talk. She doesn't see me as an ATM that occasionally needs maintenance. David's eyes filled with tears, and for a moment I saw the little boy who used to run to me when he was hurt. But then his expression hardened again. This isn't over, he said, looking at Sarah. I don't know what kind of dirt you have on my mother, but I'm going to find out. There's no dirt, David, just a woman who was tired of being taken for granted. After he left, Sarah and I sat in the gathering darkness, listening to the crickets and the gentle lap of water against the dock. How do you feel? Sarah asked. Lighter, I said, surprised by the truth of it. For the first time in years, I feel completely honest about my relationship with my son. Think he'll give up now? I watched David's taillights disappear down the lake road. No, this is just the beginning. I was right. David's campaign to reclaim the lake house became his full-time obsession. Over the next 2 weeks, he called me daily, sent increasingly desperate text messages, and even showed up at my apartment building twice. Mom, please, he said during what I'd decided would be our final phone conversation about the matter. Sarah doesn't even need that house. She's got plenty of money. So do you, supposedly. That's different. The lake house represents my childhood, my memories with Dad. It's part of who I am. Then you should have thought of that before you demanded I sell it to buy Brittany a car. That was different. I didn't know you'd actually sell it. The honesty of that statement was staggering. David had bullied me into selling the house while fully expecting me to refuse. He'd wanted to be able to tell Brittany he'd tried, while counting on my emotional attachment to keep his inheritance safe. David, I'm going to say this once more. And then I don't want to discuss it again. The house is sold. Sarah owns it legally and completely. You need to accept that and move on. I can't move on. Every night I drive by there and see her living in Dad's house, sleeping in his bedroom, using his workshop. It's wrong, Mom. It's fundamentally wrong. A chill ran down my spine. You drive by there every night? I need to see it, to make sure she's not destroying anything important. David, that's stalking. Sarah could have you arrested. She won't call the police. She knows this whole situation is messed up. I wasn't so sure about that. Sarah had been remarkably patient, but even her tolerance had limits. That afternoon, I called Sarah to warn her about David's nightly surveillance. I know, she said calmly. I've been documenting everything. Times, dates, duration of his visits. My security camera catches his car every night between 9 and 10. Aren't you frightened? More annoyed than frightened. David's always been dramatically self-pitying, but he's not actually dangerous. Still, I'm keeping records in case I need them. What kind of records? Photos of his car, video footage, a log of his behavior. If this escalates, I want to be prepared. 3 days later, it escalated. I was having lunch when Sarah called, her voice tight with controlled anger. Mrs. Sullivan, I need to tell you what David did last night. My stomach dropped. What happened? He didn't just drive by. He got out of his car, walked around the property, and looked in the windows. When I turned on the porch light, he actually tried the front door handle. Oh my God. Did you call the police? I called them this morning. They're treating it as criminal trespassing since I have clear video evidence of him trying to enter the house. What did they say? They're going to have a conversation with David. If he comes back to the property again, they'll arrest him. I felt sick. My son, who used to build elaborate blanket forts in that same living room, was now prowling around the windows like a common criminal. Sarah, I'm so sorry. I never thought he'd go this far. It's not your fault. David is responsible for his own choices. What can I do? Nothing right now, but I think you should know. I'm considering filing for a restraining order if the police warning doesn't work. After we hung up, I sat in my apartment, feeling the weight of what I'd set in motion. I'd wanted to teach David a lesson about consequences, but I hadn't anticipated him losing his mind entirely. My phone buzzed with a text from Brittany. David got arrested. This is all your fault. Fix this now. arrested. Not just questioned. Actually, arrested. I called the police station and learned that David had been picked up for violating a restraining order that Sarah had filed that morning. Apparently, the police warning hadn't been enough to deter him from his nightly visits. When I called Sarah, she sounded exhausted. He showed up again last night, just 3 hours after the police talked to him. He was in my garden, looking through the bedroom window. I had no choice. Is he in jail? He's being processed. Brittany bailed him out this afternoon. Sarah, I want you to know that if you decide this isn't worth the harassment, I'll understand. I could buy the house back from you. Mrs. Sullivan, with all due respect, that would be the worst possible outcome. If David gets the house back through intimidation and stalking, you'll have taught him that his behavior works. He'll never stop pushing boundaries. She was right, but that didn't make watching my son destroy himself any easier. Besides, Sarah continued, I love this house. I'm not letting David's obsession drive me away from the best home I've ever had. That evening, David called me from his car, his voice raw and desperate. Mom, you have to help me. Sarah got me arrested. I could lose my license to practice law. You got yourself arrested. David, Sarah just protected her property rights. I wasn't doing anything wrong. I just wanted to see the house. At midnight, by looking through her bedroom window. It's not her bedroom. It's Dad's bedroom. Dad is dead, David. It's Sarah's bedroom now. The truth of those words seemed to break something in him. He started crying, deep, ugly sobs that made my heart ache despite everything. I don't know how to let go, he whispered. Then learn. The intervention came from an unexpected source, Brittany. She showed up at my apartment at 8 in the morning, looking like she hadn't slept in days. Her usually perfect makeup was smudged. Her designer clothes wrinkled, and her hands were shaking. Margaret, I need your help. David is scaring me. I let her in, noting how thin she'd gotten. The stress of David's obsession was clearly taking its toll on both of them. What's he doing now? He sits in his car outside the house every night, even though he could go to jail again. He's got binoculars now, and he takes pictures. He's covered our bedroom wall with photos of Sarah and the house, connected with red string like some crazy conspiracy theory. I felt cold. This was beyond grief or anger. This was mental breakdown. He talks to the pictures, Brittany continued, her voice breaking. He has conversations with images of your husband. He apologizes to the house for letting Sarah live there. Have you talked to anyone? A doctor? A therapist? He won't go. He says everyone else is crazy, that he's the only one who understands what's really happening. She looked at me with desperate eyes. Margaret, I think he's having some kind of nervous breakdown. I made coffee while Brittany told me the full extent of David's deterioration. He'd stopped going to work. He'd maxed out their credit cards hiring a private investigator to find evidence that the house sale was fraudulent. He'd called every lawyer in the city trying to find someone who would take his case. The worst part, Brittany said, is that he's convinced Sarah somehow brainwashed you. He thinks you're not capable of making your own decisions anymore. That stopped me cold. He thinks what? He's talking about having you declared mentally incompetent. He thinks if he can prove you weren't of sound mind when you sold the house, he can reverse the sale. The coffee cup slipped from my hands, shattering on the kitchen floor. David was planning to have me declared mentally incompetent to steal back the house I'd legally sold. Brittany, you need to get David professional help immediately. I tried. I scheduled an appointment with a psychiatrist, but he refused to go. He said I was part of the conspiracy against him. What conspiracy? In his mind, you, me, Sarah, the police, his lawyer, were all working together to steal his father's house. I felt like I was drowning. My attempt to teach David about consequences had instead triggered a complete psychological break. He wasn't just angry anymore. He was genuinely delusional. Margaret, I'm leaving him, Brittany said quietly. I can't live with this anymore, but I'm scared of what he'll do when he realizes I'm gone. Where will you go? My sister's in Phoenix, but I wanted to warn you first. When David figures out I've left, he's going to blame you and Sarah for destroying his marriage too. After Brittany left, I sat in my apartment surrounded by broken coffee cup pieces, wondering how my simple act of justice had spiraled into this nightmare. I called Sarah to warn her about David's mental state and his plan to have me declared incompetent. Oh, Mrs. Sullivan, she said softly, I'm so sorry. I had no idea he was this far gone. Neither did I. Sarah, maybe I should buy the house back. This has gotten completely out of hand. No, absolutely not. If we give in to his delusions now, we'll be validating his belief that harassment and stalking get results. But he's talking about having me declared mentally incompetent. Let him try. I'll represent you myself if necessary. Any competent doctor will see that you're completely capable of making your own decisions. What about his safety? What about yours? I've upgraded my security system and filed a detailed report with the police about his deteriorating behavior. If he comes near my property again, he'll be arrested immediately. And Brittany's leaving him. Good for her. That takes courage. That evening my phone rang constantly. David calling over and over, leaving increasingly incoherent voicemails about his rights, his father's house, and the conspiracy against him. Finally, I turned off my phone and sat in the dark, wondering if justice was supposed to feel this terrible. At midnight, Sarah called my landline. Mrs. Sullivan, I'm sorry to wake you, but David just tried to break into the house. The police have him in custody again, but I think you should know. When they arrested him, he was carrying a crowbar and a can of gasoline. My blood turned to ice. Gasoline? The police think he was planning to burn down the house. David hadn't just lost his mind. He'd become dangerous. And somehow, I was going to have to find a way to save him from himself. The call came at 6 in the morning. David was in the county psychiatric hospital on a 72-hour hold after his arrest for attempted arson. According to the police report, he'd told the arresting officers that burning down the house was the only way to free his father's spirit from Sarah's influence. I drove to the hospital in a daze, trying to reconcile the man in the psychiatric ward with the little boy who used to make me dandelion bouquets. David looked terrible, hollow-eyed, unshaven, wearing hospital scrubs that hung loose on his frame. When he saw me through the reinforced glass of the visitor room, his face crumpled. Mom, they don't understand. I was trying to save the house, not destroy it. I picked up the phone that connected us. David, you were carrying gasoline and a crowbar. I was going to burn down just the parts Sarah changed. The paint, the new furniture. I wanted to restore it to how Dad left it. The scary part was that he seemed completely sincere. In his mind, this was a reasonable plan. Sweetheart, Dad didn't leave the house to be a museum. He built it to be a home where people could live and be happy. But Sarah doesn't belong there. She's erasing everything Dad built. She's living there, David. She's taking care of it. That's what your father would have wanted. David stared at me through the glass, and for a moment, I saw clarity return to his eyes. I think I've been sick, Mom. Really sick. I think so too, but you can get better. Do you hate me? For everything I've done? The question broke my heart. I don't hate you, David. I'm disappointed in some of your choices, but I will always love you. Even after I tried to have you declared incompetent? Even after that. I'm going to lose everything, aren't I? My law license, my marriage, maybe even my freedom. I wanted to lie, to comfort him. But David needed truth more than comfort now. Probably. But you can rebuild. It won't be easy, but you can start over. Over the next 3 weeks, David was diagnosed with a stress-induced psychotic episode triggered by grief he'd never properly processed after his father's death. The psychiatrist explained that my sale of the house had forced David to confront the reality of Robert's death in a way he'd been avoiding for years. Brittany filed for divorce while David was still in the hospital. She also pressed charges for financial fraud. Apparently, David had forged her signature on several loans during his obsession with reclaiming the house. Sarah dropped her restraining order and declined to press charges for the attempted arson, but the state prosecutor moved forward anyway. David would face probation and mandatory therapy, but no jail time. His law license was suspended pending a psychological evaluation. When David was released from the hospital, he had nowhere to go. Brittany had cleaned out their apartment and moved to Phoenix. His assets were frozen due to the financial fraud charges. I found him a small efficiency apartment near the hospital and helped him apply for temporary assistance. It wasn't much, but it was a start. "Why are you helping me?" he asked as we moved his few remaining possessions into the cramped space. "After everything I put you through? Because you're my son. Because everyone deserves a chance to heal. I ruined everything. You made mistakes, big ones, but you can learn from them." 6 months later, David was working as a paralegal at a legal aid clinic, making barely enough to cover his rent and therapy bills. He was taking medication for depression and anxiety, attending weekly counseling sessions, and slowly rebuilding his life. We had lunch together once a month. His idea, not mine. He was different now, quieter, more thoughtful, genuinely interested in my life instead of just my assets. "I need to apologize to Sarah," he said during one of our lunches. "I know she probably doesn't want to see me, but I need to try. I think she'd appreciate that. Will you ask her if she'd be willing to meet with me?" I called Sarah that evening. She agreed to meet David at a coffee shop in town, with me present as a neutral party. David had written a letter, which he read aloud to Sarah in halting, emotional sentences. He apologized for the stalking, the harassment, the attempted break-in. He acknowledged that his behavior had been inexcusable and potentially dangerous. "I don't expect forgiveness," he concluded. "I just wanted you to know that I understand how wrong I was, and that I'm getting help to make sure I never behave like that again." Sarah listened without interruption. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "Thank you for the apology, David. I can see you're working hard to get better. Is there anything I can do to make amends? Take care of yourself. Stay in therapy. Build a life you can be proud of." After David left, Sarah and I sat finishing our coffee. "How do you think he's really doing?" she asked. "Better. Different. It's like the person he was supposed to be finally has room to exist." "And how are you doing with all this?" I considered the question. The past year had been a roller coaster of emotions: anger, satisfaction, guilt, worry, and finally, something approaching peace. I'm proud of how it turned out. Not the breakdown, not the arrest, but the ending. David is getting help. You have a home you love, and I learned that I'm stronger than I thought. Any regrets? Just one. I wish I'd stood up for myself years earlier. Maybe if I had, David would never have gotten so entitled and desperate. Or maybe this was the wake-up call he needed to deal with his grief and grow up. 6 months after that conversation, Sarah sent me a photo. She was standing in the garden at the lake house, next to a small wooden bench she'd built near the spot where I'd scattered Robert's ashes. The plaque on the bench read, "In memory of Robert Sullivan, who built this home with love." I called her immediately. "It's beautiful. Thank you. I thought you should have a place to sit when you visit him. You know, I think Robert would approve of how this all turned out." "Even the dramatic parts?" I laughed. "Especially the dramatic parts. He always said life was too short for boring stories. And if I'd learned anything from this whole experience, it was that my story was far from over. At 73, I was just getting started." Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.